Welcome to another Friends in Wonder podcast, a place where we invite you to wonder with us about meaningful topics without judgment or limits. Brought to you by two lifelong friends looking for insights through a lens of how can this help?
I'm Joe Luther.
And I'm Vince Kern, and we're your hosts. Now let's wander and wonder together. All right, so today is July 21st of 2022, and it is fabulous to see you again, Joe.
Well, Vince, as they say, it's good to be seen, not viewed.
Yeah, that's for sure. Last time I saw you, you were in ICU. You had a bit of an experience. Let's see, it was what, 3 weeks ago now?
Well, yesterday was 3 weeks exactly since the surgery.
So this is a follow-up to our previous conversation before the surgery. And how the heck are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, what's interesting is the conversation that we had before the surgery was kind of a last-second idea between you and I. I think we had laid down another podcast, and the surgery of my upcoming surgery was heavy on my mind. And since we had the microphones in front of us, I thought, well, maybe a little morbid, but for posterity's sake, let's try to throw something down, just if nothing else, as we discussed, is for a time capsule of, where my mind is.
Yeah.
Right before such a, I don't know that I'll ever have a more physically invasive surgery than I did 3 weeks ago. And, certainly it was potentially life-threatening, even though, 99.9 times out of 100, it's pretty mundane for the surgeon. It was still quite invasive and something, to grapple with. So it got my attention, and I wanted to lay down something for posterity's sake, for my children, for, whoever might want to listen to it, but mostly for me, so that I could listen to it years from now.
Yeah. And for our one listener, one of the pieces of feedback that, and it certainly was true for me, is that hearing about it from a historical, experiential way, and then how you researched and made the decision to go through with it and then prepare yourself was very helpful for me to sort of put it all in context. And I think, it was a really, a time where everybody was obviously a little bit nervous, to say the least. And it was a great testimony, I think, to how well you prepared yourself.
Yeah, I think it was therapeutic both for me and for those who, we decided to listen to it. You make a joke, our one listener. Well, of course, we haven't even launched yet. We're still in the process of putting together our podcasts, our initial podcast for uploading. But, those within our circle who've been giving us feedback with our podcasts. And certainly there were family members that I shared it with because, it did turn out to be a little more therapeutic than I thought it would be. When I listened to it, I was first struck by how, for not preparing anything, I didn't even know what to expect when I turned the mic on and asked you to help me with it, what I wanted to say. It just spilled out. And then when I listened to it the following day, I thought, well, you know what? It would make a lot of sense to have a follow-up, discussion about it and maybe turn it into a part 1 and a part 2 podcast. And who knows, it may be of value for people who have this kind of a surgery in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it goes without saying that how grateful I am, and anybody who knows you that's listening to this, and even people who don't know you, are grateful for the medical expertise and the results. But that's all part of the, pudding, I guess, of what's happened to you.
Yeah.
I think, just what are you thinking now, 3 weeks later? Where are you? How are things going? And what are you thinking about?
Well, that's a very, very, very loaded question. And we may have to break that question down, but we'll see where it goes. As you know, just as, the first part of this, nothing was prepared. Really, I don't have anything prepared for this other than to say when we last spoke about it, it was maybe 4 days before the surgery. And I had some pretty Jonathan Livingston Seagull-like, peaceful thoughts in that part one discussion. I can tell you that a day or two before then, I was going through a whole different set of emotions. In fact, a couple of nights before the surgery, I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning and had what I would consider a very, very, very deep conversation with, my inner self and spirit guides and spirit itself, about, what it is I'm going through. And, a lot of it was just processing my fear. And the revelation that I had in the wee hours of the morning, just laying there in bed next to my beautiful, loving wife, just kind of going through this on my own, which was exactly the way I needed to go through it. Much like Scrooge in in the movie when he deals with his 3 ghosts, I had to look directly at my fear, and that's what I was processing. And the message that I got was that this is not a bad situation. It's only a bad situation if that's the way I look at it. It's really a good situation. I have reason to have some fear and apprehension, but the true opportunity for growth is to deal with that fear and apprehension and step over into the opposite of fear, which is surrender and gratitude and love. And as I discussed in part one, I am immensely grateful for living in this time when surgeries like this can be done, because here I am 62 years old and I could be, a victim and say, what a terrible situation it is that I had to go through this. But really, the reality is what a fortunate person I am to be able to go through this and to have, medical science and able-bodied doctors and all the testing procedures to be able to put me in a position to succeed like this. And of course now, we have the benefit of being 3 weeks after, and I can bask in that success. So to answer your question, what am I going through? Well, having come through, kind of dealing with the fear and picking myself up by my bootstraps and going forward with it, I can tell you that the day of the surgery was a little bit more of fear processing. But really I was in a pretty good place, with the new guidelines in hospitals where there could only be 2 people there. I had my wife, who was going through her own difficulty, and I had my son, one of my 2 sons, and it was Patrick who was there with her, and I was just very much at peace and almost standing outside of myself, watching it take place. I watched the pre-op nurse who was in her own world of having a lot of tasks to do. I don't even know how many pre-ops were going on when I was in the pre-op.
Gotta be
maybe
tremendous
20
amount. Yeah.
maybe 20 pre-ops were going on, somewhere between 10 and 20 were going on, and just a beehive of activity. And all you really have in between each pre-op is a curtain that kind of pulls, shut, and you could hear what's going on with all the different people. And it was interesting to observe. It was interesting to observe, the technicians coming and going. Some were, you could tell were nervous about all the things they had to do, and some were calming and and then watching the energy coming from my wife, which was beautiful and calming and soothing, and the energy that came from my son, who was tough, but also very concerned about this very important man in his life.
It was very real. This wasn't something like,
Yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm being worked on, things are being stuck in my arms and various other parts of my body, back. And, I'm being told what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden the surgeon pops in to give me my pre-op hello. And I introduced him to my son. And within minutes I was being whisked away, and like, I guess 6 hours later, I was coming to, and wow, I can just tell you, that's part one of it all.
Yeah.
Part one of it. And I think we talked a little bit about it in the part one of this podcast, is that, I thought maybe the angels might be singing when I came to, and, that I would feel this sense of relief, and that once I knew the surgery was success, that all would be fine. But instead I had this tube down my throat, and I was very groggy, and all I could think of is I had to get this tube out of my throat. And apparently I looked down at my wrists and I saw that I had been restrained, because indeed I was trying to pull the tube out of my throat. So
it's been a long time since you've been restrained like that, huh?
Yeah.
You had your wrists. Did they have your feet too, or just the
No,
wrists?
I don't think so. I think it was just my wrists. And, but kind of the opposite of the angel singing.
Did you have any cognition that you had come through surgery, or was it just, I got to get this darn tube out of my mouth?
Of course I had that cognition, because, I knew where I was, but I was also just a shadow of my consciousness, because I was so heavily sedated and just coming out of it. But the only, pulling from another podcast, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the only thing I could think of at that time was my survival depended on me getting that tube out of my throat, which I couldn't do because I was restrained. And
let me step back for a minute, because you mentioned the preparation and sort of the middle of the night, and getting yourself to a place and addressing your fears. I mean, as we know, unfortunately, there's no switch you can do to just make everything go away. I mean, there's a lot of exercises and things we can do, but you sort of you gave yourself a few days before the surgery to sort of be calm, and I mean, how did you get from sort of point A to feeling prepped? I know it took you a few days, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. They say that it's a blessing to get this kind of surgery in a non-emergent fashion, right? Because you can prepare for it properly, medically, by scoping all the arteries and veins in advance and getting all the blood tests and getting things regulated so that you're in the best position, from an anatomical, physiological standpoint, as opposed to having a heart attack, while you're at a football game or something and being dragged out of a stadium to a hospital with whoever's on call that day, and, dealing with a surgery under those circumstances. And while that may be true, from a surgeon's standpoint, that, I stand a better chance that way. I can tell you from a patient standpoint, it's interesting to deal with 3 weeks or a month of knowing that you have this surgery scheduled and processing the anxiety and fear that goes along with that. And so to get me ready for it was a process. And I think it's much easier to kind of be prepared for it when it's 3 weeks away than it is when it's 2 days away or 3 days away or the night before or the morning of. And they're all various different processes. But I don't know. To answer your question, what you're forced to do, and I think is the gift in it all, is that you're forced to look your fears directly in the eye and manage them. And some people do it in many different ways. I'm sure everybody does it in a different way. And there's denial. There's maybe laughter, or so many different ways of trying to deal with it. What I found worked best was to just keep coming back to gratitude. And that's where I was the day of the surgery. And when I saw that surgeon, I was grateful that I knew I had a great surgeon and a great team and a great, pre-op process, and that I was in the best possible position that I could be in. Could I have flown to Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic and been in a slightly better scenario? I don't know. I feel like I was in the best possible position I could be in with the loved ones where I wanted to be. And so that's where I was. I don't know if that answers your question. But
Yeah.
that's where I was, in those various stages of pre-op. And then when I came out of it, it was really an unknown for me at that point, because I think I had spent so much time dealing with the up to the surgery that I hadn't fully thought about. I read the papers that they give you about what to expect after surgery. But it's kind of like, talking about what to expect, before you skydive. Like, it's just like something you've never experienced before.
Yeah.
And the only way to really deal with it is to go through it. And I, originally felt that, when I had the tube down my throat. I want to get this tube out of my throat. And, it was only a matter of 40 minutes, I think, or maybe less. I don't even know. It seemed like a long time. But I think they said after I became conscious, I needed to breathe on my own with that tube in my throat for at least 20 minutes before they would take it out. The idea being if something happened, they didn't want to have to re-intubate. They just were in a position to maybe resedate me and put me back on the breathing machine. So I just kind of had to wait it out for 20 minutes. And once that came out, what a great sense of relief. Then I started begging for water. They could only give me a little bit at a time. That was clearly, the Maslow hierarchy thing is like, okay, now I've got the tube out. Now I want water. Okay, now I've got some water. When can I have some ice? Okay, now I've got some ice. When can I have, some soda or Jello or whatever it is? And then slowly I started, recovering.
Right. And you spent, 4 or 5 days in ICU?
Well, it was a total of 5 nights in the hospital. So the surgery was on a Wednesday. That Wednesday early evening, I came out of surgery, and I can tell you, I remember it, but it was just a blur. And that was night 1. I woke up the next day. At any rate, I was in ICU partly because they they were a full hospital. I think, who knows why they're a full hospital. I think it's still recovering from a lot of the surgeries that were put on hold during COVID. I don't know what it is, but a lot of hospitals are full and at capacity right now. And the one I was in was no different. So I stayed in intensive care probably a night, maybe two longer than I would have had they had step-down beds available for me. But all total, it was 4 nights in ICU and then 1 night in the step-down. So 5 total nights in the hospital. And each day was just another milestone of getting better. They got me out of the bed, the following day. And, there were these tubes that they had coming out of my abdomen, which a friend of mine's wife was a post-cardiac, heart surgery ICU nurse years ago, and she had told me about these tubes. Probably they told me about it at some point during my pre-op process, but not as in a real fashion as my friend's wife told me about it. And I understood that to be a milestone, getting those drainage tubes. So what it is, obviously there's the big incision where they open the sternum and operate on the heart. But after they close that up, it's kind of wired shut and then stitched at the skin. They have these tubes coming out from under the rib cage in the abdomen area that allow for drainage inside the chest cavity that have to do with, I guess, the normal kind of drainage that would happen post-traumatic surgery, the bones being cut and the arteries being harvested and the inner tissues being cut and sewn and all that. So they've got to naturally drain. So you have these kind of 3, and in my case, there were 3 tubes that were in me that were going into 3 separate boxes, and they monitored the amount of volume that was draining. And as soon as there's not much volume, then they pull the tubes out. It's supposed to happen within a couple of days. Well, that was a big milestone for me too. The first tubes came out, I think, within 2 days, and the third one came out on the 3rd day. And that was like Fred Astaire dancing on the ceiling when I got that 3rd tube out, because then I could lean forward in a chair and do a lot of things on my own that I didn't realize I was, those tubes were stopping me from doing. But again, so it was just this process of every day getting better.
Yeah.
And yeah,
probably all you could think about was what you had to do, right? I mean, what you had to do to get better, what you had to do to get out of there.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're home and it's a whole nother environment and it's recovery. And I'm sure you've had a lot of time to think about all kinds of things, given the nature that you're usually a very active person and doing things, and you've had to slow down a little bit. But how's that been like?
Well, yeah. And so it's interesting. The part that I didn't really talk about yet, maybe I got into a lot of the details there about the physical recovery and getting out of the hospital. I also had some preconceived ideas of what it would be like when I got home. And I based that probably on, I had a horrible leg break a few years ago, 12, 13 years ago. And I know what recovery from that was like. And I thought, well, maybe it would be the same thing where I literally was, bound to a couch in a colonial style house where the bedrooms and the showers are upstairs. So I thought that's what I was going to have when I got home. And as it turned out, I was physically a lot better than I thought I would be. I was certainly physically more capable than I was after this terrible leg surgery that I had to have after my, it was a massive tib fib break,
But it was a hockey accident, so you got that
Oh
going
yeah,
for you.
it has a very manly story to it until you get into the details of it. But yes, it was a hockey accident. No, so when I got home, I was physically able, literally, to walk upstairs and sit in my shower stall and take a shower and then walk back downstairs and have dinner and then go back upstairs that night and sleep in my own bed. I was shocked at how physically capable I was to do that, within 5 days after surgery. The other part that I don't think I've really addressed yet that is an interesting topic, and that is managing my loved ones. There was so many.
Wait a minute, aren't they supposed to be managing you during this time?
Well, I mean, managing.
I know what you mean. Yeah,
yeah.
You got a lot of people in your support group.
Yeah, and that's a blessing, for sure. But I'm still not sure yet what the dynamic is that I was trying to navigate by maybe like you said, who's managing what, right? I mean, all I was getting was love and support from my close network of friends and family. But at the same time, I felt stifled, and I don't know, it wasn't that I was suffocated by it, because you can never be suffocated by too much love. But there were times I thought, kind of like the elephant that wants to go off by itself before it dies. Dogs or whatever. I just wanted my own peace and solitude to deal with it a little bit before, a little bit after. But when I got home, I was like ready to start, talking to people and allowing that back into my life. And that was wonderful. There was only so much of it I could handle at first, because it's interesting. One of the things that I didn't discuss in the hospital is that, you take for granted so many of these, bottom of the pyramid, Maslow-like needs. And one is, right when I came out of surgery, just a breath sufficient to piece together a full sentence required my chest cavity to expand large enough that it created pain for me, So I was limited, my first day or so to just very small amounts of words. And, they give you this thing to breathe. It's a pulmonary breathing assistant that you blow into, which helps, expand your lung capacity, helps you not get pneumonia too, because if you continue to allow nothing but short breaths, then you're going to have crap accumulate in your lungs. Right. So a big part of the process is expanding your breathing. And when I got home, I was getting pretty able to talk to people. And it was wonderful at that point, because there were a lot of people who I had kind of put at bay and put others in charge of communicating with, who wanted to hear from me. And I had, a whole list of people who wanted to hear from me. And so when I got home, it was like, okay, it's time to start going through.
I wonder if, back in the days when we were hunters and gatherers, something like this would be cause for a group celebration, and then everybody could express everything sort of all at once. But here you are in modern society, and before you're going in, you've got numerous people who want to give you their well wishes and
right.
and let you know they love you. And then after, when you're in the hospital and you can't really talk, you've still got that. Now it's a different incoming barrage of need for people to feel that they've connected and comfortable and show you that they love you and they're happy for you.
Well, they want to show their love. There's no doubt. They also want to quell their own fears by hearing my voice or seeing my face. Knowing firsthand that everything is okay, and that's perfectly correct of them. There's just a limit to what I'm capable of. And what's interesting is, obviously I want to talk to my children first, and when I say first, my wife was there with me throughout. And then, you came and visited me in the hospital, and our friend Paul came and visited me in the hospital, and my son Matthew. And that was really the extent of it. And that was probably about all I wanted at that point. My daughter Stephanie was out of state and not able, but I don't know. I don't actually remember. I think I did talk to her for a short time while I was in the hospital. I know I talked to her after I got out of the hospital. And then it was just a matter of, okay, siblings and close friends and how much can I handle? But what was interesting, as you say, in the old days, the whole group could have been there and I could have said it all at one time and everybody would have been, their needs would have been satisfied by that one moment.
We'd all go back to our huts and carry on. Yeah.
I would have liked to have made a recording and let her, but I'm not sure that would have sufficed for people. So I was kind of, for the first week, repeating myself. I was in a Joe, one-on-one
report giving.
Yeah. Tape loop where I was pretty much telling people the same story over and over again, but each time was a special one-on-one with whoever that person was. And, some, it took me a week to get to, but they were all equally important and special. And then finally I got through that list and, I think everybody by that point also knew everything's going to be okay. And really now here I am. I'm just slowly, do I still have the occasional pain? Of course I do, but I'm way better than I thought I'd be at this point, and I'm certainly good enough to put this microphone in front of my face and field questions from you.
Something I've been looking forward to for a while, and I'm sure you have too, because it's great to be back. It's just great to be back in the game, doing what it is that we want to do. And I think I have to, first of all, commend you for your thoughtful process of how you managed all of everything, including, communicating and getting yourself prepared. It's really a very inspirational thing to see because, I struggle with a lot of things and fears, obvious. I have fears and soul parts missing that I'm working on and things like that. Right. We all do. But to
Jesus struggled.
Yeah. But, to watch you go through what you went through it's inspiring in the way that you did it. I guess, you can't come out of this without, and I don't want to put you on the spot, by ranking anything, but you got to have some huge takeaways from the whole experience, from your personal growth perspective to, I know you've talked a lot about how grateful you are for modern medicine, but, from a growth perspective, what can you talk a little bit about what's the biggest impact of all this on you?
Well, again, heavy, deep question. And, to try to synthesize it down to a succinct answer is not easy because it's really a process. And the process that I had in preparation that I thank you for the way you complimented me on my process. It was just one that I was doing the best that I could. And again, it was from a place of gratitude. And in post operation, it's really the same thing. It continues to be gratitude because, apart from the fact that I could very well be dead, it reminds me, it reminds anybody listening who wants to think about this, that life is a miracle. And, my life was saved, in that surgery, or my death was postponed, however you want to discuss it, because eventually, there's only so much I can do. But at age 62, people would say it's too early. And surely, hey, I met with one of my cardiologists yesterday, and he told me in his infinite wisdom, he said, I got to tell you, I think you're going to die of something other than coronary artery disease. And
he wasn't looking at your chart when he was saying that, was he?
No, he wasn't.
Okay.
He wasn't reading an X-ray when he said that. No, he said that to give me the idea that maybe I'm past this as an issue. And so, am I living on borrowed time? I mean, we're all living on borrowed time. It's inspirational to me to think about what happened to me. Uncle Ralph, who we discussed in part 1 of this podcast, who's, immensely curious. And he told me in one of his texts or phone conversations that I had with him after the surgery that he had watched a few of the YouTube videos on my surgery, and he encouraged me to do the same thing. And I thought, I don't know about that one. Well, I did. A few days ago, I decided to see, just so I could maybe understand better, what I'm going through physiologically in the healing process. I don't know what I was going to, feel by looking at it. But I will tell you this, it's nothing short of miraculous that they can do what they did to me. And I don't care how many they do a day or how many times out of 1,000 they're successful, or how many years extra I get from this. It's a miracle. Just like the beating heart that we all have is a miracle. The fact that mine now has new passageways to be fed with blood is a miracle. And so my takeaway, to answer your question, is that I'm still in awe. I'm, of course, in wonder, because we are friends in wonder, and we'll always be friends in wonder. But I am in awe at the miracle of this process, and I am in total gratitude. And we can talk about telescopes looking 14 billion years back into time and be awestruck by so many different things. But I am awestruck by this beating heart that I have, and awestruck by the fact that I live at a time when, I'm fortunate enough to have the process that I've had and the opportunity to continue to give in whatever way that I can going forward.
Man, when we ask about, a lot of times we talk about our culture going in these directions, in the wrong directions. But, if you look at this from a perspective going all the way back in time and what humans have accomplished and able to give you this miracle, that obviously points to miracles. But, and I suppose the trick is to keep that frame of mind and transcend that into every second and minute that we have, because that's really the challenge. And I think, it's great to see your energy back. You've got a lot of great color in your face.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm a fully healthy human being right now, just recovering with some aches and pains, but every day is better. And you're right, Vince. I think, like I said, the gratitude that I have is that it's really forced me to appreciate each heartbeat that I have. But I think we're all called to do the same thing. And, those who've listened to this, maybe, we've helped in some way to have gratitude. There may be people that are about to go through what I just went through. And I hope that they also get something like this out of this discussion, that, it's there's just so much to be grateful for, whether you go through this or not. It's all gratitude.
It reminds, it definitely reminds those who've watched you go through it that every heartbeat is important. Certainly yours is to all of us.
Yeah.
And may all of our hearts beat as one, and may we keep that spirit among us.
Indeed. Well, any other questions?
Well, so ends another episode of Friends in Wonder. We want to thank you for listening. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, provide feedback, questions, or topics you'd like us to wonder about in future episodes, be sure to check us out at friendsinwonder.com. We'd be grateful if you subscribe, like, or share this podcast. Until next time,
I'm Joe.
and I'm Vince, and we're Friends in Wonder.